First off, welcoming you to Colga Chats with Colga. Yay. Thank you so much for being here in this moment and taking time out of your day. Like I said earlier, it means a lot to me. So starting off strong with our first question, let's talk about DEI. Miss April, tell us, what do you do and how do you get into this space?
For sure. I work for an organization called Purpose Built Communities. We're based in Atlanta, and I came into the organization to lead our racial equity and narrative work. I come from a communications background. That's what I've done for the last almost 20 years, which is kind of crazy to say out loud. But came to Purpose Built to do their racial equity work. So my communications practice had always been around equity, um, just working in issues that impacted any marginalized community, usually people of color. Um, is, uh, is it too loud? Are you saying me okay?
Okay, yes, yes, great.
Like making announcements. But yeah, so I from a communications background, but my practice has always been in the equity space. So looking at racial justice and equity, looking at gender justice and equity, looking at LGBTQ issues. And so for a number of years, I was learning that when people talk about equity, they were really talking about housing, like affordable housing, they were talking about educational equity, or they were talking about health equity. So I came to Purposeful because those are all the areas that we work on. And I was really curious of what does it feel like to not just talk about equity, but how do you actually operationalize it, or how do you actually achieve it in a way that improves and strengthens people's lives through a neighborhood sort of level.
Wow. Thank you for answering that. That was very well spoken. Thank you for giving us a little background information on your job and what that really means to you. Moving on to our second question. Why is DEI vital?
It's vital because progress is really a process. We need some of these measures and institutions in place to make sure that everybody has equal access and can live the best quality of life that they deserve, and that we know that it's possible in this country. Like humans are fallible, like we are not perfect, so we can't always rely on good intentions or assume that people have the best intentions to act accordingly. So these different policies and practices ensure that everybody's needs are met from however they show up in life. And if we don't have them, there's no guarantee that that's possible. So that's why it's so vital that we maintain and keep these DEI measures and whatever they look like for a lot of folks, but we do need them. And I say what it looks like for a lot of folks because understanding that right now people are saying DEI without having a clear definition of it, and the way that they're
Yes.
using it isn't always actually what it means. So it's really important to understand that, really unpacking what does it mean for each sort of community, organization, institution, and acting accordingly, but really holding to those values, that we're not in a place yet in our country where everybody is able to live freely as much as our rights should entail. And so we need to have these sort of measures in place to ensure that we can get as close to it as possible.
Thank you. And quick side note question. To the people who might struggle with, what the word DEI means, in simpler terms, what would you say that means? Explaining it to them.
For sure. Typically, I explain diversity, equity, inclusion as ensuring that there are policies or practices in place that really enable everyone to live the best quality of life that is possible. That understanding sort of the barriers, systemic and structural, that have not made that possible for everyone. That sometimes we have to make a sort of course correction, and that's what DEI allows us to do.
Great. Yes, that was perfectly answered. Moving on to question three. Why do you think people are fearful of DEI?
That is probably a much bigger question than I can answer fully right now, but a bit close to it, I think, if I put my communications hat on, that a lot of people don't always know what things mean, and sort of the media takes on these buzzwords and they create a lot of energy and anxiety around them. And so sometimes people are operating out of fear because fear is being sold to them. And they don't have another community or outlet or another source of information to tell them differently. Um, and like there are people who fear change, right? Like there's a lot of power in being on top. So like DEI, what it's really calling for is course, to live in a more equal and fair society. And equal and fair um, fundamentally means that some people who have been in power won't be in power in the same way. And that's a really scary and hard thing for some folks if they're used to being on top, you know?
Yes. Yes, I can definitely concur. Moving on to question 4, how do we educate and motivate better conversations around EI?
For sure. So I think it's probably like multifold. One of them I think is definitely like a communications element and making sure that we're explaining ourselves very clearly, but also there's a relationship building piece, right? So much of um, I won't say so much, but I think some of the misinformation out there is because people aren't in community with other people, right? They're getting their information from media sources that are like in New York or LA, and they're like people who aren't even interacting with the folks that like feel aligned to, right? So like how some ways that you change that is building relationships because we know that like when you build relationships, when there's trust, it gives you a different point of view, a different insight to how others live. And you can kind of start to see yourself more in other people once you foster some of those relationships. And so I think it's not necessarily always about communicating about DEI, but really thinking about like what happens, what's made possible when equity is achieved. That's what we really want to lean into. And know that
Yes.
it's an ongoing process, right? That like it takes time, it takes constant engagement and conversation.
Yeah.
So not something that you can, it's not a one and done kind of situation.
Yes, like many things, definitely takes conversation and a lot of hearing out. So yeah, it is a process, to understand. Moving on to number 5, our last question. Where do we go here with DEI? Like from here?
Yeah. So I think again, like right now, it's really hard because a lot of organizations and in government and otherwise are really focused on the words, and we're kind of having to pull back from those words because a lot of them are being banned in grant making and funding. And so I think really just thinking about like what are your values, what's your mission, what's your purpose, and staying the course with that. So kind of free yourself and untether yourself from the words themselves to really think about the actual work that you're trying to achieve and sticking to that.
Yes, ma'am. Well, thank you so much, Miss April, for
For
being on this
sure.
answering my 5 simple questions. Your time was so
Yeah,
greatly appreciated.
for
I'm wishing
sure.
you a safe flight.
Thank you. And
And again, thank you so much for
yeah,
taking time out of your day.
thank
And
you.
this
And
is
if
it with
anything
Chat
else,
Kolga. Thank you so much. We appreciate you.
thank you. Take care.
Thank you. You as well.
All right. Bye.